Forget everything you think you know about King Charles III. We read diving deep into hidden archives and untold stories to expose the astonishing secrets he fought to keep buried. Was Camilla's rise to power a calculated move? And what shocking betrayal paved her path to the throne? The cameras that crowned him in light never showed what waited behind it. The rooms of Windsor where portraits were turned to the wall. The corridors where the silence of one woman became the making of another. The coronation may have seemed a closing chapter, but it was really the prologue to a story the monarchy hoped you'd never read. To understand it, we have to step backward, into the years when he was still a prince, weighed down by the ghost of a woman the world adored. Diana's image was more than memory. It was mirror and punishment. Every gesture he made was measured against the one he'd lost. And standing just beyond the frame was Camilla, constant, patient, quietly gathering power in the same way dust gathers on velvet. Inevitable, unshakable, almost invisible. Those who served in Clarence House spoke later of locked drawers, of letters written in trembling hand and signed with nothing but initials, of phone calls erased from logs before dawn. History records official duties, the palace records everything else. Between them lies the truth. Even before the crown touched his head, Charles understood that secrets are the currency of survival. The monarchy feeds on appearances, and every smile is collateral. Betrayal in such a world isn't sin, it's strategy. But strategies leave fingerprints, and the British archives are a house of ghosts, each whisper preserved in ink and silence. Tonight, we open those doors, not with scandal's hunger, but with history's precision. We'll trace the letters, the leaked tapes, the quiet pardons, and the one decision that changed the royal line forever. Because in every empire built on blood and ceremony, love is never simply affection, it's warfare disguised as grace. Listen carefully. Between the applause of the crowd and the tolling of the coronation bells, there's another rhythm, the heartbeat of a kingdom that knows too much and says too little. And it begins here, where loyalty ends and legacy begins. To the world, the crown is a symbol of triumph, gold, glory, continuity. But to those born beneath its weight, it is a prison built of ceremony and silence. Charles understood this long before he wore it. From childhood, his life was measured in public gestures, the handshake rehearsed, the smile trained, the emotion contained. His every breath recorded, judged, dissected. He was raised not to feel, but to perform. Those who watched him closely in the 1970s remember a young man who hesitated before cameras, whose eyes betrayed a constant search for escape. The Royal Navy gave him water. The polo field gave him wind. Neither gave him freedom. When he returned to the palace, the doors closed like iron gates behind him. He was expected to marry not for love, but for image, to produce heirs rather than happiness. The monarchy does not tolerate improvisation. Diana was chosen not because she fit his heart, but because she fit the photograph. The court smiled when they walked down the aisle, the perfect illusion of stability. Yet illusion, once cracked, reveals the cage. Behind the velvet curtains, marriage turned to negotiation. Letters leaked, whispers thickened. The crown demanded obedience from both, but Camilla had never learned obedience. She had learned endurance. While Diana shone under flashbulbs, Camilla survived in shadow, the safer kingdom. Those years forged Charles more than any coronation ever would. He discovered that isolation could be a weapon, speak less, control more. The palace walls, once his boundaries, became his allies. He learned the value of patience, of letting time erode opposition until silence itself bends to your favor. By the late 1990s, when tragedy shattered the monarchy's facade, Charles faced a choice: retreat into guilt, or reshape the narrative. He chose the latter. Camilla was quietly rehabilitated, first as friend, then as companion, finally as inevitability. What the tabloids called scandal, history might one day call strategy. Still, those close to him, insist the crown he wears today is heavier than gold. It carries ghosts, Diana's laughter in echo, public suspicion in every cheer. His triumph required consent from a nation still grieving the woman he wronged. That is the paradox of monarchy. Every act of love must be sanctioned by strangers. So when he stood in Westminster Abbey, hand trembling slightly as he touched the scepter, he was not claiming freedom. He was accepting confinement renewed. A king bound not by oath, but by the memories of those who cannot forgive. Power rarely announces itself. It gathers in corners, behind closed doors, under the guise of patience. Camilla learned this early. She had no crown, no lineage that guaranteed her a throne, only endurance and a talent for surviving storms that would have crushed others. While tabloids painted her as the intruder, those within the royal circle understood her better. She was the constant. When Charles wavered, she steadied him. When scandal burned, she walked through the smoke without flinching. Her rise began not with victory, but with exile. After Diana's death, public fury turned her name into ash. Crowds jeered, newspapers feasted. She vanished behind countryside gates, living like a ghost in borrowed houses. Yet within the silence, she waited. Waiting was her craft. The monarchy, slow to forgive but slower to forget, needed a narrative of redemption, and Camilla was willing to become its architect. Step by step, she rebuilt herself. Charities, quiet appearances, no interviews, no demands. The press softened, advisors murmured approval. Within palace walls, she became indispensable, the calm behind the storm, the steady hand on Charles's shoulder when the world turned its back. To the public, she was still the reminder of betrayal. To the crown, she was the guarantee of stability. Those who have seen the private diaries of the late courtiers speak of her influence in whispers. She learned to speak their language, one wrote, not of affection, but of duty. In royal politics, love is leverage, and Camilla mastered it. She turned affection into strategy, compromise into currency. Every invitation, every photograph, every silence had purpose. By the early 2000s, her return was inevitable. Buckingham Palace called it modernization. Historians might call it reclamation. The woman once branded a destroyer became the symbol of endurance, the survivor of monarchy, as most public crucifixion. Even her critics began to admire her composure. She smiled not from triumph, but from relief, the quiet satisfaction of someone who has endured everything and remains standing. Yet beneath that composure lies a truth few admit. Her victory came at a cost, measured not in jewels, but in ghosts. The image of Diana lingers, an uninvited guest at every banquet, her absence louder than applause. Camilla wears the crown not only of queenship, but of consequence. Those who meet her privately say she moves with a kind of careful grace, aware that history watches her every gesture. She understands that forgiveness in Britain is conditional, offered only when the story feels complete. But stories of betrayal never truly end. They echo, reshaping themselves for new generations to judge. When she walks through Westminster now, she passes portraits that once excluded her. The palace has rewritten its script, yet the audience still remembers the first act. And perhaps that is her final triumph, to reign in a theater that once condemned her, knowing that even the applause carries ghosts. Every monarchy survives on the illusion of loyalty, yet within its corridors, betrayal is the true heir, silent, inherited, inevitable. The story of Charles and Camilla is not simply romance or redemption, it is a tapestry of betrayals, each thread darker than the one before. The first betrayal was not of a wife, but of a promise, the unwritten pact between monarch and people. When Charles vowed to love, honor, and cherish, the nation believed it was part of that covenant. Diana's humiliation felt collective, a wound shared by millions who had watched her grow from shy bride to broken saint. When the truth surfaced, the recorded whispers, the confessions caught on tape. It wasn't merely gossip, it was revelation. For the first time, the monarchy's sanctity cracked under the pressure of human desire. Behind the gilded doors, aides scrambled to contain the fallout. Statements were drafted, then burned. Advisors resigned. The Queen herself, bound by duty and restraint, regarded her son with the same gaze she reserved for a failed empire. Disappointed, but unsurprised. Camilla became the scapegoat, the nation's vessel for anger. She endured it with frightening composure, as if she understood that guilt, when worn long enough, becomes armor. But betrayal, once set in motion, multiplies. Those who tried to protect Charles began protecting themselves. Long-serving courtiers leaked details to friendly journalists, selling fragments of truth for survival. Letters meant for private eyes appeared on front pages. One household became two kingdoms at war, fought not with swords, but with whispers. And somewhere in the middle stood Diana, the betrayed-turned-betrayer. Her interviews, her eyes glistening with grief, her words carefully sharpened. There were 3 of us in this marriage. It was both confession and execution. Public sympathy crowned her the people's queen, and the palace learned that image could wound more deeply than scandal. When she died, the monarchy itself staggered. In that moment, Charles's greatest fear came true, that he would never be forgiven, not by the public, not by history, not by the woman who haunted every photograph he took. For years he carried that silence like penance, shaping his life around it, until time and patience did what apologies could not. They blurred the edges. Camilla's eventual return to favor required a final act of betrayal, not against Diana, but against perception. The palace rewrote the narrative, not forbidden lovers, but enduring companions, not scandal, but second chance. Truth was quietly exiled, replaced by acceptance masquerading as mercy. Britain, weary of outrage, allowed the lie to stand. That is the paradox of royal betrayal. It begins as sin and ends as strategy. In the gilded halls of monarchy, nothing is ever forgiven, only rebranded. And those who survive learn the cruelest rule of all. The crown demands not devotion, but denial. Long before the coronation, before the public reconciliation and the smiles rehearsed for cameras, there were the letters. They were the monarchy's most fragile secret, handwritten, folded, and sealed in thick cream envelopes. Dozens of them, exchanged over decades, written in the language of those who had everything yet could risk nothing. Some were tender, others desperate. They began when Charles was still a married man, when meetings were arranged in borrowed houses and conversations disguised as charity work. The palace denied their existence for years, calling them fiction. But servants remember the smell of wax and ink, the quick sweep of footsteps when someone approached the wrong door. A few of those letters would eventually surface. The infamous tapes, transcribed by journalists hungry for blood. What the public heard was laughter, flirtation, scandal. What history hears now is something colder, confession. In those words lay the anatomy of power, not passion. They reveal a man trapped between obligation and obsession, a woman who understood that access is influence. Love, perhaps, but love written on state stationery. Archivists in Windsor speak off the record of a chest stored deep within the round tower, its key held by only 2 living people. Inside, it is said, rest letters too delicate for daylight. Some were written after Diana's death, apologies, or maybe just explanations. Others contain instructions, which advisors could be trusted, which could not. The handwriting trembles in places, as if the pen itself carried guilt. The existence of that chest was nearly exposed once, in 2012, when a former aide leaked excerpts to a foreign tabloid. The story was swiftly buried under injunctions, but the shadow remained. Lawyers spoke of private communications of constitutional sensitivity, the kind of phrase that hides daggers behind formality. What could be so dangerous, so irreparable, that it still requires silence in an age of leaks? Those who have glimpsed even fragments describe an intimacy that borders on strategy. Camilla counseling restraint after public failures, advising patience when public favor dipped, reminding him that history forgets faster than it forgives. She understood the institution better than most courtiers. The letters read less like lovers, correspondence, and more like blueprints. How to survive a monarchy on fire. Perhaps they remain sealed because the story they tell is not of passion conquered, but of conscience compromised. They show two people remaking their own morality to fit the palace walls, turning betrayal into routine, love into logistics. Some secrets die with their keepers. Others become architecture, supporting the facade above. The hidden letters are mortar in that structure, binding the royal narrative together, unseen, unspoken, indispensable. If they were ever opened to the light, the crown might not crumble, but it would lose its gleam forever. When the crown finally touched Charles's head in Westminster Abbey, it was not a coronation, it was a reckoning. The gold shimmered under the lights, but within the weight of that metal lay every silence he had ever purchased, every apology he had never spoken. The audience saw pageantry. He felt debt. For a lifetime he had prepared for this moment. The schooling in restraint, the endless protocol, the rehearsed humility, each lesson designed to convince a nation that duty could cleanse desire. Yet the crown does not erase the past, it amplifies it. As the choir sang, he felt the eyes of ghosts upon him, his father's stern judgment, his mother's iron composure, Diana's quiet question. Was it worth it? Camilla stood beside him, steady and poised, a woman who had outlasted scorn itself. Her crown was smaller, but its weight no less severe. Together they represented survival, not sanctity, a monarchy reborn through scandal's ashes. Every jewel on her head had been polished by years of endurance, each one a reminder of what she had endured to stand there at all. To the cameras, they appeared unshakable. Yet those who were close enough to see beyond the glare noticed his hand tremble when he lifted the orb, the faint hesitation before repeating the oath. Perhaps it was the burden of faith, perhaps it was memory. History rarely distinguishes between the two. The price of the throne is isolation. Friends fade, truth dissolves, and every affection becomes suspect. Even now, palace staff speak of the unspoken rule. Never surprise the king, never question the queen. The closer one stands to power, the colder the air becomes. What the public forgets is that monarchy feeds on contradiction. It must appear eternal while constantly reinventing itself. To survive, Charles had to make peace with his own infamy, to transform betrayal into stability, scandal into legacy. His reign began not as redemption, but as negotiation. With the press, with Parliament, with the memory of a woman buried in flowers 25 years before. The coronation marked victory only on the surface. Beneath it ran the quiet understanding between husband and wife, that every cheer from the crowd contained an echo of accusation, that every flash of light recalled the glare of exposure. Power, for them, would never mean freedom. It meant endurance, a shared silence carved into history's stone. As the ceremony ended and the crown settled perfectly in place, a chill passed through the abbey. It wasn't draft or superstition, it was acknowledgement. The monarchy had survived another storm, but at a cost only two people could truly count. They had won their thrones, yes, but in doing so they had forfeited everything else. History has a strange mercy. It forgets loudly and remembers in whispers. For Charles and Camilla, that is both a blessing and a curse. They reign over a kingdom that no longer believes in sanctity, only spectacle. Their love story, if it can still be called that, survives not in devotion, but in documentation. A library of images, statements, and silences curated for public comfort. In the official narrative, the monarchy endured, reformed, and evolved. The phrase appears in speeches, documentaries, and schoolbooks, a new era of transparency and modern love. But history's light always casts a shadow. Behind the official portraits hangs the truth the palace dare not frame, the cost of survival, paid in trust and time. For every gesture of compassion Charles now performs, there lingers the echo of all he concealed. For every smile Camilla offers, there is a flicker of the woman who learned to rule from the sidelines, shaping destiny through endurance. The world may have forgiven, but forgiveness built on exhaustion is fragile. The British public has a talent for grace, but an even greater memory for grief. The younger generation of royals carries that tension like inherited blood. William, molded by duty and restraint, walks the narrow bridge between affection and decorum. Harry, untethered, fled across an ocean to escape the very ghosts that built his father's throne. In their divergence lies the echo of the same story. Loyalty tested, truth edited, family replaced by function. Within Buckingham's archives, curators catalogue each decade with sterile precision. The scandals, the reforms, the celebrations. But the real archive is intangible, the collective consciousness of a nation that measures morality through monarchy. And it knows that every crown glitters brightest over buried guilt. When the historians of the next century write of this reign, they will note its contradictions. A king who preached harmony while haunted by division. A queen who triumphed through patience yet ruled beside the memory of the woman she replaced. They will speak of modernization, sustainability, compassion. The palace's favorite words. But between those lines will live a quieter truth, that the modern crown survives not by example, but by editing. Outside the palace gates, tourists pose for photographs beneath gray skies. They see marble, not marrow. They hear anthem, not echo. But if you stand there at dusk when the lights flicker on in the royal windows and listen past the hum of the city, you might hear something older. The murmurs of unfinished prayers, the shuffling of ghosts who never learned to rest. This is the legacy of shadows. A monarchy sustained by what it hides, adored for what it pretends to reveal. And if you've walked with us through these corridors tonight, remember, truth doesn't vanish when concealed. It waits. And one day, it always returns to the throne.